I'm Sergeant Ramsey. Listen, we had a report of a disturbance at your house, and there were shots fired. Is your husband Michael? Okay, I'm sorry to tell you, man. He's been killed. He's been killed, man. Listen, try to calm down. Right now, we need to get you. We need to get you to the police station. I can't let you stand there. We have to do our job. We want to find his killer, okay? We need you to calm down. I need you to go with these kids. If you want to help your husband, you need to go to the station with these gentlemen. Thank you, guys.
I want you to quit your acting and get this over with.
I'm not.
Yes, you are.
I'm not. I didn't do anything, please. I didn't do anything.
Since you're the wife, we got to advise you of your rights, so you know. Okay? And first of all, let me just tell you, I'm sorry for your loss.
I just want to see my husband, please.
All right, honey.
I love my husband. I want to see him.
No, you don't want to see him.
I just want to see him.
Believe me, you don't. How long have you guys been married?
Not even a year.
It's tragic. Is there anybody you could think of that would want to do this to him?
My husband's on probation.
For what?
He's for stock fraud.
Stock fraud? Was he spending time in prison?
2 years in prison and 5 years on probation, going on to 6 years.
Oh my God. And what was that for?
It was for taking money. So it was a lot of money. It was $191,000 that he had to pay back. People weren't happy that he was getting on probation because it's a lot of money he's got to pay back.
She switched from being extremely upset to very businesslike. She seems to have sort of a clear, developed theory as to why this might happen. You know, that's a little puzzling.
You're lucky you went to the gym.
We were supposed to go to the gym.
Oh, both you were supposed to go?
Every morning, 5 a.m., we're both at the gym. Yeah.
You got a lot of, that's better than me. I wish I could go, obviously.
Well, you know, he's very, he used to be a drug addict.
What was his drug of choice?
Crack.
Crack? Yeah, good kid.
And, he's recovering alcoholic. And so with him, it's very important to be, like, on a schedule.
She's making sure that the police understand that he was a shady guy, to direct their attention away from her and start to consider the world that he inhabited.
I think that's what raises, for me, an eyebrow. Suggesting that her husband is someone that many people might want to kill. It's a peculiar narrative to have for anybody.
I don't know if you know, he was shot. He was shot twice. And I want you to know all this.
Do you know this?
Did they tell you out there?
Not exactly. I mean, they told me he was shot.
When the officers got the doors wide open, they went in and looked. And he was found in the bedroom. He was shot twice in the head. Was he asleep when you left?
No, he was just laying there, and he set the alarm, you know. I said, you know, I'll bring you coffee on the way home, and, you know, normal.
I want to see if the house was burglarized.
Okay.
All right, just hang on one second.
Thank you.
You want to wait here? You close the door, please.
For the psychopath, the goal of turning on and off is to manipulate and impress the viewer.
She's very skilled, and she missed her calling. She could have been an actor because she can cry on command. She seems to have some mastery of her emotions, and not everybody does.
Hey, what's up? Huh?
Honestly, you worth seriously killing over that much money?
It's not even about money. Like, you know that money. We'll spend it like a blink of an eye. Like, it's about like his friends and all that other like me going and filing for divorce. Like, he'll come after my ass. Period.
This guy, this is all he does. He doesn't want nothing to do with you after.
Good.
Okay? And he might tell you, it's like to get out of town or something for a day.
Yeah, but the problem is that I never go out of town. Or I'll go somewhere else. But
You like an alibi to be somewhere.
Right,
where they
right,
can
I'll
verify
go-
when it happened.
yeah, I'll go get my hair done or something, or I'll be somewhere.
It's interesting that she would choose to get her hair done, feeling like he's so worthless that I can spend my time doing something that benefits me. She doesn't like him. I wonder why.
Okay, he's not even gonna collect me until after he shows you, he's dead. So that's the way he works.
Right.
I'm giving him the deposit and
I brought
making nothing up.
1,200. Like, that's all I brought. Here. Here's.
Okay, so after he killed him, like his mom is not gonna be suspicious of you or anything like
Why
that.
me? Come on. I mean, nobody's gonna be able to point a finger at me.
Well, there's a couple of psychopathic traits sort of running through this, and this complete detachment from the situation and overrating her own confidence in a grandiose way.
Despite the fact that she comes across as a fun-loving, attractive young woman, there are some real deficiencies. But she's sure that no one would ever point a finger at her because, look, I'm adorable.
Hey.
We're staying in Paris.
All right, yeah.
Okay.
Man, he looks good.
Yeah.
First thing first. 3,000. And then, I'll do my thing. All right? Is he your husband or something? Boyfriend? Husband? How y'all been married? No, for real, because the thing is, I just want to make sure that, this is what you want. All right? So, sure you want to kill this dude? That's how I'm going to do it. The robbery went bad. Now, once that's done, I'll wait a few days. I'm not going to call you right away because the police going to be all over. Understand?
I'm a lot tougher than what I look. I know you see me and you're like, oh, what a cute little girl, whatever. But I'm not.
The whole exchange is so bizarre, it's so inappropriate, but that's part of her performance, to be cute. Female psychopaths are so rad that we can't even put a percentage on it. But female psychopathy manifests quite differently. There's gendering in almost everything.
When she describes herself as a cute little girl, she's really letting you know how she thinks the rest of the world looks at her. But don't let that fool you. So right there, you sort of get the bifurcation between how she presents herself to the world and who she really is.
I was going to get 3,000 from you today, and 3,000 when it's all done.
Right.
Okay? All right, Wednesday morning, go to the gym.
Alright.
I don't want you at the house. Even if you change your mind, I'm talking all the
There's
time.
no changing, no, there's no, like, I'm determined
Definitely
already.
you wanna do
I'm positive, like,
Okay.
5,000% sure, like.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Alright, thank you so much, and I guess
You're here for
I'll hear from you.
All right.
Alright, thanks a lot.
Okay.
Bye.
You know who this guy is?
No,
You've never seen him before.
I've never seen him before, ever.
What were you doing coming out of her house? Where's your head up?
I've never seen him.
Get him out of here.
They brought into the room the undercover cop who was masquerading as a hitman to see if she was going to admit that she knew him.
She knows damn well she met with this guy. She is unflappable, and she's a good actress. She does have really quite admirable control of her emotions.
You're going to jail today for solicitation of murder. You're under arrest. That's an undercover police officer. We filmed everything that you did, recorded everything that you did. You're going to jail for solicitation of first-degree murder of your husband.
I didn't do anything.
Did you hear what I just told you?
I heard what you said, but I didn't.
Everything, listen to me. Everything has been recorded. You were photographed in the convertible when you sat in his car. What do you want to do? What do you want to do here?
I didn't do
Dahlia?
anything.
Listen to
I
me.
didn't do anything.
You're going to
I didn't do
jail.
anything, please. I didn't do anything.
Tell me you didn't do anything.
I didn't do anything.
You're going to jail today.
Oh my God.
What's going on here is that the jig is up. She's just in the face of reality, just saying, like, I didn't do anything. She set this in motion. So this lets you know how infantile she really is. When you speak to a lot of antisocials or psychopaths, there is an infantile quality, to them. She's not that sharp. She's put her trust in someone. And again, I think it's that self-deluded and grandiose notion that she's a cute little girl.
The role of smallness, cuteness, fragility. In this particular instance, it's to manipulate the detectives into feeling sorry for her and then letting her go.
You better quit your plan. Listen to me. I want you to quit your acting and get this over with.
I'm not.
Yes, you are.
I'm not.
Okay, you know what? You need a real good attorney. You need a real good attorney because we're going to show them the film where you say you're 5,000% sure you want him dead. You think I made that up? You think I made that up?
Oh my God.
He's alive.
Come here, please. Come here. Mike, come here.
me, please? Come on.
We're witnessing a game show from hell. Basically, this whole thing was a setup. And of course, the police knew that. She didn't.
Mike, come here. Come here, please.
She's asking him to soothe her. Not like, I need to explain myself or I need to apologize for this whole thing. But it was like, come here, come rescue me. But I guess Mike wasn't having any of it.
I think it's not a coincidence. It's really notable that she met her husband while escorting. One of the requirements of a woman who escorts is that you have to shut down your own feelings in order to become whatever the fantasy is of the client. And so detachment and performance go hand in hand.
Hello?
Hey, it's me. Please come here.
Listen, I don't want to fight with you. Honestly. I can't help you.
Mike, please, I need an attorney. Can you please help me?
That's not true. And what said you wanted to have me killed? I heard that.
How can you believe that?
I heard your voice. I don't understand.
Did not say those things. Period.
I don't know how you're going to actually have the nerve to sit here and lie to me now.
Mike, I love you. You're so beautiful. I can't do anything to you. You know me. I didn't want to do anything awful to me.
Know what I'll do? You know what I'll do for you? Seriously?
What?
You sign my house back over to me. I'll help you, Mom, immensely.
I'm not signing anything. I'm sitting here watching. You're thinking about
Now you start having me killed. I just offered to help you, and again, you have the balls to say no to me, which is hilarious considering your situation and considering what the just happened today. All right?
It's my house. The title's in my name.
The minute he says, return my house, her voice just drops into this sort of cold, like, it's mine. She switched out of sort of this performance into an actual feeling, which is, I am entitled to this house. The interesting thing about psychopaths is they're no real person because they don't really have an integrated identity. They just take on the persona that is necessary to survive. And that's why they can be charming, they can be manipulative, they can be all these different things. The focus on the money doesn't make her psychopathic. It's the ruthless determination and coldness in obtaining it.
I had some acting experience, and so we were all going to work on an actor's presentation to put up on social media.
Okay. And so your ex-husband's in on this all along?
Yes.
Your whole goal in this thing was to become a reality TV star? Is that your goal?
It was to get an act.
Millions of people see you, so you become famous and wealthy.
Breaking news, a murder mystery emerges in the woods. 3 people are dead. Police are now on a manhunt for the killer, and they are searching across Florida. In a house in Chuliota, police discovered a family murdered. A couple in their 50s and their son in his 30s were found dead. And now, this just in, the prime suspect is a family member, Grant Amato. Officials say he is armed and dangerous.
Tell us what happened, Grant.
I didn't do any of this.
Do you not feel bad for doing this to your family?
I don't know.
Yeah, he's like almost balding, right? Yeah.
He just killed his whole world. This is family. That was my understanding. The mental thinking of this guy is like the battle of him is gone. All the way down. All the way. Here's the plan. If he comes out that door, it is your job to engage him. Okay, let's see the bodies. All right, stand by. Get to it. The county detectives want to talk to you, so.
I mean, I have my like duffel bag and whatnot in there if you guys want to check that.
Yeah, that'll be up to the detectives to talk to you.
How are you?
I'm here.
Hey, we really appreciate you coming over with us. Why do you think we're having this conversation?
I honestly don't know, but I'm pretty freaked out at this point because, I mean, I know like how the situation was when I left.
I mean, you're a smart guy. You know something's happened at your home. You have law enforcement here. You haven't heard or gotten any
Well,
emails.
I mean, I'm just scared as to what the answer is.
Give me a roundabout what you're thinking.
That somebody in my family's dead.
And how does that make you feel if you're thinking that?
I have absolutely no ability to comprehend the words.
He's actually being very concrete. I don't think that he has the ability to experience that empathy. The tone of his voice is strange. It's sort of teletype in tone. It is related to that lack of emotional connectivity, that empathy, that ability to convey emotions to other people and hear emotions from other people. That is a sign of psychopathy in him.
Did you do anything to Cody?
No.
Did you do anything to your mother?
No.
Did you do anything to your father?
No.
You have any reason to believe that anybody else would harm them?
No.
Did you leave the house with your brother Cody looking like that? Or did you leave the house with your father looking like that? Or your mother? Is that how you left your family?
No.
Nobody else went into that house.
Who left your family like this? Tell us what happened, Grant.
No, I didn't do any of this.
They want to get an emotional hook in the person so they can play on guilt, sadness, or remorse, and then get the person to confess. For Grant Amato, this technique is not likely to work. They are trying to tap into emotions that simply aren't there.
Who was the disciplinarian in the family?
My dad. Countless times, my dad would like come up to me and he'd make like me feel guilty so that I would, you know, do everything that I can, like get a job.
Almost like a motivation?
Right. He would just make me feel bad. Like I'm not contributing. Over the past 4 months or something like that. I've been talking to this woman online.
Who's she?
She's as embarrassing as it is. She's a cam model.
A what?
A cam model. A cam model is like a virtual girlfriend, I guess you could say.
Okay.
Like that type of situation.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the money went to her.
So how much do you think you spent on this?
Probably close to like $200,000, I'd say.
$200,000?
Yeah.
And where'd the money come from?
Money came from me, my brother, and then my dad.
He blew $200,000 essentially on virtual reality that he stole. There's obsession, there's impulse control problems, and there's lack of recognition that in stealing this money, he harmed his family.
He's taking it secretly, which is much more than exploitative and parasitic. So that's more of the psychopathy realm. He's going to use them or their money so that he can get what he wants.
Hello. So, how are you? I've been having a long day.
I understand. You were sweet to me yesterday. So I'll be understanding today.
And what did she charge? By the minute, by the hour?
Minute.
For some reason, I think that you're gonna suffer today. I know you would like to pull me into you, isn't it? But you cannot.
Grant has lost himself in a fantasy. People who suffer from what we call erotomania fall in love with people who don't actually really have a relationship with them. It is more than an obsession. We refer to it as a delusion. Delusions are really beliefs that are firmly held in spite of evidence to the contrary.
Oh, poor baby. I'm so sorry.
No, you're not. You're not sorry at all.
The fantastical, imaginary connection is making him feel alive, whereas when he's being interrogated, he's a shell of a man. The fact that they're interacting where she's non-glamorous is contributing to his delusional belief that it's a reciprocal relationship. He believes this is real, that she is real. He doesn't seem to understand that this is about money. If she were real, he wouldn't know what to do. She would be too alive, too overwhelming, too threatening, too beautiful, and feel that he couldn't perform.
One of the stipulations was, if you speak to this woman again, you're out of the house.
What we're looking at is an itemized list of issues and rules that the family would like him to adhere to. Current Grant responsibilities. A, get job. This is absolutely a threat. Owes family apology, and in parentheses, we don't expect due to lack of real feelings. I believe the family noticed the signs of psychopathy over the years, that lack of genuine connectivity, a follow through with what he would say he would do.
You know, it wasn't really my intention to continue talking to this woman, but it just kind of happened. And then because there was like that emotional connection, I guess you could say, between her and me, like I It felt like a relationship.
All right, Sylvia, look at me. I'm outside going to check the mail. And I'm asking you if you can please, pretty please, send me one of your videos. I love it so much when you just send them to me. Yeah, I don't like buying your stuff. It makes me feel weird. Could you please send me one though?
He wants a free video because he doesn't have any other way to get it. He doesn't have money, but also because then it would be evidence that Sylvie truly loves him and that it's not a fantasy relationship, it's reciprocal. The key thing here is he's not able to attach to real people, and this is only possible in a virtual way.
I don't know how he found out, but he had apparently found out, and then he kind of, pulled me up from the couch, and then he was yelling at me to pack my up and just get out of the house.
And then what?
There was an argument when Cody had gotten home.
And then when you left Cody, what did he say he was going to go do?
Cody said that he will take care of it.
So if anything happened in the home, to bring law enforcement there, what would you think happened?
That there was a shooting.
Between whom?
I don't know. Between Cody and my dad.
You're seeing somebody expressing a pretty psychopathic trait. I'll just throw my brother and the family under the bus, even though I killed them. There's no empathy there.
This is consistently being driven by a delusional belief that he's going to get back together with Sylvie. It's a very cold move in the name of love.
Factual items do not support what you're saying. Didn't fire a gun, didn't fire a gun, didn't fire a gun. None of them did. If these two got in a shooting, we would know. We would know they shot each other. We'd know that.
I don't have the answer for anything else.
You don't show the remorse that you should for someone who's lost 3 family members? Body language, eyes, and demeanor.
My brother even said the same thing of when all this financial stuff was happening, why I couldn't show a sadness towards it. And I just don't know what else to say.
Do you not feel bad for doing this to your family?
I don't know.
The frustration when the policeman is sitting there is that he can't believe it. When you meet with someone who has psychopathy, it's as if part of us refuses to believe that someone could be so callous and so uncaring. That's what the policeman's responding to. And that's what we see and feel with people who have psychopathy. There is no human glue. There's no emotional glue that connects you to them.
The detachment is interesting to me. And this detachment seems to have carried over into his rage in a sort of a tool, if you will, that let him plan and carry out this murder.
So, I take it you know what happened. I'm gonna ask you plain out. You are not part of it anyway.
probably will have resentment for the rest of my life, whether you did it or you didn't do it, but I need closure. I need to know what happened to my mother, my father, and my brother Cody. Because I wasn't there to help. And that hurts me. That hurts me a lot, man.
I understand. I mean, I really do. I understand all your thoughts and what you're thinking and everything, and this is just, you know, I know what I did to everybody over the months and everything like that.
He seems to have slipped up when he said, I know what I've done to everybody. Then he catches himself. He can't forgive his family because he blames them for ruining his fantasy love.
It was not fair that Mom, Cody, and Dad's life were taken. They did not deserve it, no matter what feelings were felt by anybody. They were good people.
I know. And they showed it by protecting me all the time.
I don't feel like we're getting anywhere, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't feel comfortable with you staying with me. If you already made the decision on whether or not they can live or not, that's not your job. Alright, I'm ready. I do love you, though. Just remember that. Just like Mom, Cody, and Dad loved you. Nobody loves you any more or any less.
On the southern edge of New Zealand's South Island, where the land narrows into windswept beaches and the sea seems to stretch endlessly into a grey horizon, there was once a small settlement that many people barely noticed on a map. Aramoana. A quiet place. A place where children rode bicycles along gravel roads without fear. A place where doors were often left unlocked. A place where neighbors knew one another's names, routines, and family histories. For most of its existence, nothing extraordinary happened there. And perhaps that was why what happened in November of 1990 felt so impossible. Even today, decades later, many New Zealanders can remember exactly where they were when they first heard the news. At first, the reports were confusing. A shooting. Then multiple victims. Then more gunfire. Then police officers moving through the darkness house by house. As the hours passed, the situation became harder to comprehend. How could something like this happen here? Not in a large city. Not in a place known for violence. Not in a country that many people viewed as one of the safest corners of the world. Yet on that spring evening, an ordinary coastal community became the center of one of the darkest chapters in New Zealand history. The story of Aramoana is often remembered through statistics. 13 civilians killed. Multiple people wounded. A police officer who would never return home. A nation left in shock. But statistics have a way of flattening tragedy. Numbers cannot capture the silence that settled over the town afterward. They cannot describe the empty chairs at family dinner tables. They cannot explain what it felt like for survivors to wake up the next morning and realize that the world they knew had disappeared overnight. Because before Aramoana became a headline, it was a community. And before the victims became names in newspaper articles, they were fathers, mothers, children, friends, neighbors, and loved ones. To understand the tragedy, we must first understand the place. Imagine a narrow strip of land pressed between sea and sky. The air carries the scent of salt and damp grass. Seabirds circle overhead. Fishing boats move quietly across the harbor. The pace of life is slow enough that people notice small changes. A new face. An unfamiliar vehicle. A dog wandering farther from home than usual. Aramoana was the kind of place where routine created a sense of security. Morning followed morning. Evening followed evening. The rhythm rarely changed. Yet beneath the surface of every community there are stories that remain unseen. Private frustrations. Unspoken fears. Loneliness hidden behind closed curtains. Lives unfolding in isolation only a few streets away from people who believe they know one another. Sometimes those stories remain invisible forever. Sometimes they erupt into public view with devastating consequences. In November 1990, one such story collided violently with the lives of an entire town. The man at the center of that story was not a stranger. He was not someone who had suddenly appeared from somewhere else. He lived there. People had seen him. Some had spoken with him. Others had formed impressions over the years. Certain residents remembered him as distant. Others described him as peculiar. A man who seemed increasingly disconnected from those around him. Yet very few could have imagined what was coming. Because the warning signs that become obvious in hindsight rarely look obvious in the moment. Human beings are remarkably skilled at explaining away uncomfortable observations. A strange interaction becomes a bad day. An angry outburst becomes stress. A withdrawn personality becomes simply someone who prefers solitude. Communities do not expect catastrophe. People do not wake up each morning preparing for the unimaginable. And so life continued. The sea continued to roll against the shore. Children continued to play. Families continued to make plans for the future. Nobody knew that within hours those futures would be shattered. As daylight faded on November 13th, the sky above Aramoana carried the soft colors of a typical spring evening. The settlement settled into its usual routines. People returned home. Meals were prepared. Conversations drifted through open windows. The ordinary details of everyday life unfolded exactly as they had countless times before. There was no visible sign that history was about to change. No alarm. No warning siren. No announcement. Just another evening. And then, suddenly, it wasn't. Some tragedies arrive like storms visible from miles away. Others arrive without warning. One moment the world is familiar. The next moment it becomes unrecognizable. What happened in Aramoana belongs to that second category. The transformation was swift. Confusing. Terrifying. For many residents, the first indication that something was wrong came not from official warnings but from fragments. A distant sound. An unusual movement. A feeling that something wasn't right. The human mind often struggles to recognize danger when it appears in an unexpected form. People search for ordinary explanations. A car backfiring. Construction work. Anything except the truth. Because the truth is often too frightening to accept. Yet as the evening progressed, uncertainty began giving way to fear. Questions spread faster than answers. Rumors moved from house to house. People tried to understand what was happening while events continued to unfold around them. And somewhere within that growing confusion, lives were already being changed forever. In the years since the massacre, investigators, journalists, psychologists, and historians have all attempted to answer the same haunting question. Why? Why did this happen? Why here? Why these people? The search for those answers would continue long after the gunfire ended. But before anyone could begin searching for explanations, they first had to survive the night. That night would test the courage of ordinary residents. It would test the resolve of police officers entering an unpredictable and dangerous situation. And it would leave scars that remained visible long after physical evidence disappeared. The story we are about to tell is not merely a story about violence. It is a story about a community. About fear. About courage. About the fragility of normal life. And about how a single evening transformed a peaceful coastal settlement into a place forever etched into the memory of a nation. Because when people remember Aramoana, they often remember the horror. But behind that horror are human stories. Stories of neighbors helping neighbors. Stories of families searching desperately for loved ones. Stories of officers walking into uncertainty because others needed protection. Stories that deserve to be remembered with care. Tonight, we return to November 1990. We return to a small community by the sea. We return to the final hours before everything changed. And we begin with a question that still echoes across the decades. How does an ordinary day become the day that history never forgets? To understand what happened in Aramoana, it is necessary to travel back to a different New Zealand. Not the New Zealand seen in glossy travel brochures. Not the version marketed to tourists through images of dramatic mountains and crystal lakes. But the New Zealand that existed in everyday life. A quieter place. A slower place. A country where many communities still operated on trust. In 1990, Aramoana sat at the edge of the world in more ways than one. The settlement rested on a narrow spit of land near the entrance to Otago Harbour, not far from Dunedin, yet it often felt disconnected from the movement of modern life. The road leading into the community seemed to narrow not only geographically but psychologically, carrying visitors away from cities, schedules, and crowds. People did not move to Aramoana because they wanted excitement. They moved there because they wanted distance. Distance from traffic. Distance from noise. Distance from pressure. The settlement itself was small enough that nearly everyone recognized everyone else. Some homes faced the sea. Others looked toward rolling dunes and stretches of grass bent by constant coastal winds. Weather shaped daily life. The ocean shaped daily life. The isolation shaped daily life. In many ways, Aramoana felt less like a town and more like a collection of people sharing the same landscape. Children explored beaches after school. Fishermen launched boats before sunrise. Neighbors borrowed tools from one another. Families gathered for community events. The pace was predictable. The routines familiar. And familiarity often creates the illusion of safety. The sea surrounding Aramoana could be beautiful. On calm mornings, sunlight reflected across the harbor like liquid silver. Seabirds drifted effortlessly through the air. The water appeared peaceful enough to belong in a painting. Yet anyone who lived there long enough understood another truth. The ocean could change quickly. A calm horizon could become violent within hours. Storms could arrive with little warning. Beneath the beauty existed power. Perhaps communities are similar. Perhaps beneath ordinary routines there are forces people do not fully see. For decades, Aramoana had remained largely untouched by the kinds of violence that dominated headlines elsewhere. People worried about weather. They worried about employment. They worried about money. They worried about ordinary life. Mass violence belonged to distant places. Distant countries. Distant television reports. Not here. Certainly not here. The wider region surrounding Aramoana carried its own unique identity. Dunedin, located nearby, possessed a rich history shaped by Scottish settlers, maritime trade, and generations of working families. Its streets combined old architecture with practical industry. Its people were known for resilience. The surrounding coastal communities shared many of those characteristics. Life was not always easy. Jobs came and went. Economic uncertainty affected households throughout the 1980s. But communities adapted. People helped one another. Families endured difficult periods together. Throughout New Zealand during that era, social changes were creating new pressures. Economic reforms transformed industries. Some communities prospered. Others struggled. Employment opportunities shifted. Traditional ways of life faced increasing uncertainty. Many people felt left behind by changes occurring across the country. While these transformations affected thousands of New Zealanders, they did not affect everyone equally. Some adapted successfully. Others found themselves drifting further from society. Some individuals discovered new opportunities. Others became trapped in cycles of isolation. And isolation, when left unchecked for years, can become something difficult to measure. A person may continue living among others while slowly withdrawing from the world around them. They may appear physically present but emotionally absent. They may stop participating. Stop trusting. stop connecting. Over time, the distance between themselves and everyone else grows larger. Not all isolation leads to danger. Most of the time it does not. But when isolation combines with anger, resentment, instability, and untreated psychological struggles, it can become a warning sign visible only in hindsight. Long before the events of November 1990, there was a man living within this community whose life increasingly reflected those patterns. His name was David Malcolm Gray. At first glance, there was little about him that suggested he would one day become infamous. He was not wealthy. He was not powerful. He was not a public figure. He lived quietly. Often too quietly. People who encountered him frequently described a man who seemed detached from those around him. A man who occupied the same physical space as everyone else while somehow existing separately. He lived in a house that became almost an extension of his personality. Cluttered. Disorganized. Neglected. The property reportedly reflected years of withdrawal from conventional expectations. While many residents maintained gardens and homes that reflected pride and routine, Gray's surroundings often appeared chaotic. Visitors who entered the property sometimes came away with an uncomfortable feeling. Not necessarily fear. Not yet. But discomfort. The kind of discomfort people struggle to explain. The sense that something was not quite right. In small communities, unusual behavior rarely remains completely unnoticed. People talk. They compare observations. They remember incidents. Over time, a collective picture begins to emerge. Yet even when concerns exist, communities often develop ways of accommodating individuals who do not fit comfortably within social norms. Residents learn which neighbors prefer privacy, which neighbors are difficult, which neighbors should simply be left alone. David Gray gradually became one of those individuals. Someone known. Someone recognized. Someone discussed occasionally. But not necessarily someone fully understood. Accounts from people who knew him painted a complicated image. He could appear awkward. Withdrawn. Socially disconnected. There were reports of erratic behavior over the years. Moments that left others uneasy. Interactions that felt strange. Yet those moments existed as isolated fragments rather than a complete picture. And fragmented concerns rarely generate alarm. Human beings are remarkably poor at predicting extreme acts. Even when warning signs exist, they often appear ambiguous. A difficult personality is not a criminal. Social isolation is not violence. Mental health struggles do not automatically lead to dangerous behavior. The challenge lies in recognizing when multiple factors begin converging into something more concerning. Unfortunately, such recognition often comes after tragedy rather than before it. As the years passed, Gray's life appeared increasingly disconnected from the rhythms that governed the wider community. Many residents measured time through work schedules, family events, and social relationships. Gray's life seemed to move according to a different clock. Employment instability reportedly affected him. Personal frustrations accumulated. Relationships with others often appeared strained. The distance between himself and the community around him continued growing. Yet while neighbors observed pieces of this reality, nobody possessed a complete understanding of what was occurring inside his mind. And that is perhaps one of the most unsettling aspects of many true crime cases. The gap between what people see and what people know. A person can live among others for years while carrying thoughts, grievances, fantasies, or fears that remain entirely hidden. The human mind is private territory. Even those closest to us often see only fragments. As spring approached New Zealand in November 1990, life in Aramoana continued according to familiar patterns. The weather shifted between sunshine and coastal winds. Families planned holidays. Children attended school. Residents moved through ordinary routines without realizing they were approaching a moment that would divide local history into two distinct periods. Before and after. In hindsight, people often search for signs. They revisit memories, conversations, observations, small incidents. They attempt to construct a pathway leading inevitably toward tragedy. But reality is rarely that simple. Most lives do not announce their turning points in advance. Most disasters do not arrive carrying clear labels. Instead, they emerge from ordinary days. Ordinary streets. Ordinary moments. A disagreement. A frustration. A decision. One event connects to another. Then another. Until suddenly the outcome appears obvious. Yet it only appears obvious because people are looking backward. The residents of Aramoana were not looking backward. They were living forward. They were concerned with dinner plans, family obligations, work schedules, weather forecasts, and everyday responsibilities. The future remained unwritten. The danger remained invisible. And perhaps that is what makes this story so haunting. Nothing about the landscape suggested catastrophe. Nothing about the sea suggested catastrophe. Nothing about the spring air suggested catastrophe. The settlement remained exactly what it had always appeared to be. A quiet community on the edge of New Zealand. A place where people expected tomorrow to resemble today. A place where children expected to wake up and continue living ordinary lives. A place where parents assumed they would grow old watching those children become adults. A place where police officers believed their next call would likely involve the kinds of incidents common to small communities. Nothing more. Yet somewhere beneath the surface of those assumptions, forces had been building. Quietly. Patiently. Unseen. And on the afternoon of November 13th, those forces would finally erupt. The transformation would be so sudden that many residents would struggle to comprehend what they were witnessing. The peaceful rhythms that had defined Aramoana for generations would be shattered within hours. The roads would become scenes of confusion. Homes would become places of fear. Neighbors would become separated by uncertainty. And a community that had spent decades trusting the familiarity of everyday life would discover how fragile that familiarity truly was. When future generations spoke the name Aramoana, they would no longer think first about beaches, fishing boats, seabirds, or quiet coastal sunsets. They would think about the day everything changed. The day an isolated settlement became the center of a national tragedy. The day New Zealand lost a measure of its innocence. And the day an ordinary spring afternoon began moving toward one of the darkest nights in the country's modern history. Long before the name Aramoana became associated with tragedy, it belonged to people. That is the detail history sometimes forgets. When a crime becomes famous, attention often gravitates toward the offender. The headlines focus on the person who caused the devastation. Investigations dissect motives. Documentaries analyze behavior. Books examine psychology. Meanwhile, the lives that were interrupted risk becoming footnotes. But in Aramoana, the story begins not with the man who carried out the violence. It begins with the people who called that place home. On the morning of November 13th, 1990, nobody woke up believing they were living the final day of an ordinary life. Children laughed. Adults made plans. Neighbors exchanged greetings. The world felt stable. Predictable. Safe. The victims of Aramoana were not connected by fame, wealth, or status. They were connected by proximity. By community. By the simple fact that they happened to be living their lives in the same place at the same time. Some had spent years there. Others had arrived more recently. Each carried private dreams, private worries, and private plans for the future. None of them knew those plans were about to end. In small settlements, daily life is built upon familiarity. People recognize vehicles before they recognize faces. They know who owns which dog. They know which house keeps its porch light on late at night. They know which families gather outside on warm evenings. Life becomes a collection of repeated encounters. The woman walking home from work. The father repairing a fence. The children riding bicycles down the same road every afternoon. Those routines may seem insignificant until they disappear. Only then do people realize how much meaning was hidden inside ordinary moments. The victims of Aramoana represented the heart of that community. Parents who spent years building homes and raising children. Young people still discovering who they wanted to become. Neighbors who offered help without expecting anything in return. People whose names rarely appeared in newspapers because they were busy living normal lives. And perhaps that is what makes stories like this so painful. Evil often arrives without regard for who someone is. It does not distinguish between kind people and difficult people. Between adults and children. Between strangers and friends. The victims of Aramoana were not chosen because of what they had done. Most were simply caught within the path of a catastrophe they could never have anticipated. Across the settlement that day, life moved at its usual pace. The spring air carried the scent of the ocean. Seabirds drifted above the shoreline. The harbor reflected shifting patches of sunlight. From a distance, nothing appeared unusual. A visitor passing through might have remembered the scenery. The quiet roads. The weathered houses. The endless horizon. They would not have sensed the fragility hidden beneath the surface. For families living there, the afternoon unfolded like countless afternoons before it. Meals would soon need preparing. Errands needed completing. Children would return home. The concerns of everyday life occupied people's attention. No one was watching the clock and thinking that everything was about to change. Some victims spent their final hours engaged in entirely ordinary activities. Conversations with loved ones. Household chores. Visits with neighbors. Simple routines that seemed unremarkable in the moment. Those moments would later take on enormous significance. Family members would replay them repeatedly. The final words. The final smiles. The final wave goodbye. Human memory has a tendency to preserve ordinary moments once they become final moments. What seemed insignificant at the time becomes priceless afterward. A brief conversation at a doorway. A promise to meet later. A casual remark spoken without any awareness that it would be the last. In the aftermath of violent crime, survivors often find themselves returning to these fragments. Searching for comfort. Searching for meaning. Searching for connection. The families of Aramoana would experience that same painful process. They would remember birthdays. Family gatherings. School events. Summer holidays. Shared meals. The thousands of moments that made up a life. Because when someone dies unexpectedly, grief does not focus solely on their absence. It focuses on everything that absence represents. Every future event they will never attend. Every milestone they will never witness. Every conversation that will never happen. The victims left behind empty spaces that could never truly be filled. Some of those spaces existed around dinner tables. Some existed in classrooms. Some existed within friendships that had developed over years. Others existed inside families whose histories had been permanently altered. The impact of tragedy extends far beyond the individuals who lose their lives. It ripples outward. Parents lose children. Children lose parents. Brothers lose sisters. Friends lose lifelong companions. Communities lose pieces of themselves. Aramoana would experience all of these losses simultaneously. Among the most heartbreaking aspects of the massacre was the fact that children were among those affected. There is something particularly devastating about violence intersecting with childhood. Children represent possibility, potential, the future. When a child's life is cut short, people instinctively think not only about who they were but about who they might have become. The careers they might have pursued. The families they might have built. The experiences they never had the chance to enjoy. Entire lifetimes disappear before they can fully begin. For the families involved, grief became intertwined with imagination. Not only mourning what was lost but mourning what would never exist. Years after the massacre, survivors and relatives continued carrying memories that remained vivid. The sound of a loved one's laughter. Their favorite activities. The way they spoke. The way they entered a room. The habits that once seemed ordinary. Death ends a life. It does not erase a presence. That presence continues living within memory. Yet memory can be both comforting and painful. Comforting because it preserves connection. Painful because it constantly reminds people of what has been taken away. The residents of Aramoana understood one another in ways outsiders often could not. They shared geography, shared routines, shared experiences. After the tragedy, they would also share trauma. The community itself became a victim. Not in the legal sense. Not in the statistical sense. But in the emotional sense. A place that once represented safety became associated with fear. Roads once linked to childhood memories became linked to loss. Landscapes once viewed with affection became reminders of a terrible day. Collective trauma transforms locations. People continue seeing the same buildings, the same shoreline, the same sky. Yet nothing feels entirely the same. The memory of what happened becomes part of the landscape. For many residents, the hardest realization arrived gradually. Not during the crisis itself. Not during the first hours afterward. But in the days and weeks that followed. The realization that normal life was not waiting around the corner. There would be funerals. There would be investigations. There would be media attention. There would be questions without satisfying answers. And there would be grief. An immense amount of grief. The kind of grief that settles into a community and remains there for years. When historians discuss Aramoana today, they often focus on broader consequences. The impact on gun laws. The national response. The lessons learned. Those conversations matter. But before any of those consequences existed, there were human beings. People with names. People with stories. People who woke up expecting an ordinary day. The true cost of the massacre cannot be measured solely through numbers. Numbers tell us how many died. They do not tell us who they were. They do not tell us about the families waiting for them to come home. They do not tell us about unfinished plans. Uncelebrated birthdays. Unspoken goodbyes. The victims of Aramoana deserve to be remembered not as statistics but as lives. Lives that mattered before the tragedy. Lives that mattered during the tragedy. Lives that continue to matter decades later. Because every victim carried a world within them. Memories. Relationships. Dreams. Fears. Hopes. Entire universes that vanished in a matter of moments. And as the afternoon of November 13th slowly moved toward evening, none of those people could have known how precious the remaining hours would become. The roads were still quiet. The sea was still calm. The settlement still looked like the peaceful community it had always been. Yet history was already moving toward them. Invisible. Relentless. Only a short distance away, events were beginning to unfold that would soon drag Aramoana into one of the darkest chapters of New Zealand's modern history. The victims did not know it. Their families did not know it. Their neighbors did not know it. But the ordinary world they had trusted for so long was about to disappear. And when the sun finally set over the harbor that evening, Aramoana would never be the same again. The afternoon of November 13th, 1990, began like countless afternoons before it. Nothing about the sky warned of what was coming. Nothing about the sea suggested that within hours Aramoana would become known across the entire country. The settlement moved through its familiar rhythm. People worked on small household projects. Neighbors crossed paths. Children enjoyed the freedom that came naturally in a community where everyone seemed to know everyone else. The day carried the comfortable predictability that residents had come to expect. Then, sometime during the late afternoon, that predictability fractured. What began as a local dispute quickly evolved into something far more serious. At first, the people nearby did not understand what was unfolding. In peaceful communities, the mind searches for ordinary explanations. When something unusual happens, people rarely jump immediately to the worst possible conclusion. They assume misunderstandings, arguments, accidents, anything but catastrophe. Yet confusion soon gave way to alarm. A growing sense spread through the area that something was terribly wrong. The details remained unclear. Information traveled slowly. One person heard something. Another saw movement. Someone else received a warning from a neighbor. The picture emerging across Aramoana was incomplete and fragmented. People knew enough to be frightened. Not enough to understand why. The settlement's small size, normally one of its greatest strengths, suddenly became a source of vulnerability. The roads connecting homes were familiar. The open spaces between properties usually felt peaceful. Now they seemed exposed. Residents who only hours earlier had moved freely through the community began looking through windows rather than stepping outside. Families gathered together. Doors were locked. Curtains were drawn. People searched for information while trying to protect those they loved. Fear has a strange effect on time. Minutes feel like hours. Ordinary decisions suddenly seem loaded with consequence. Should you stay where you are? Should you leave? Should you call someone? Should you check on a neighbor? Throughout Aramoana, individuals were forced to make those decisions with very little information. Many residents had no idea where the danger was located. Some did not know whether it was moving. Others did not know who might already be affected. The uncertainty became almost as frightening as the reality itself. As reports continued to spread, emergency services began receiving calls. The situation developing in Aramoana was unlike anything most local responders had encountered. At first, authorities faced the same challenge confronting residents. Information arrived in fragments. Each new report suggested a situation larger and more dangerous than initially believed. What appeared at first to be an isolated incident soon revealed itself to be something much more serious. Within the community, people attempted to contact family members and friends. Telephones rang unanswered. Questions multiplied. Parents searched for children. Spouses searched for partners. Neighbors searched for neighbors. The absence of information created its own kind of terror. Every unanswered call seemed significant. Every delay felt ominous. As daylight slowly began to fade, the atmosphere across the settlement changed completely. Only hours earlier, Aramoana had felt open and welcoming. Now it felt uncertain. Fragile. The familiar landscape no longer offered comfort. The same roads, homes, and pathways residents had known for years appeared transformed by circumstances nobody could fully comprehend. In many true crime cases, there is a clear dividing line between before and after. For Aramoana, that dividing line arrived during those hours. The community that existed before the incident would never fully return. The physical location would remain. The people who survived would remain. But the collective sense of security that had defined life there would be permanently altered. As authorities worked to understand the scope of the crisis, the reality confronting them became increasingly alarming. The danger had not ended. It remained active. Unpredictable. The priority shifted from understanding what had happened to preventing further loss of life. That challenge was made more difficult by the environment itself. Aramoana was not a dense urban area where large numbers of officers could quickly establish control. It was a small coastal settlement with scattered homes, open ground, and numerous places where uncertainty could hide. Every movement required caution. Every report required evaluation. Every decision carried risk. Meanwhile, residents remained trapped inside a situation they had never imagined experiencing. Many later described the uncertainty as one of the most difficult aspects of the ordeal. People knew something terrible was happening. What they did not know was when it would end. Would it be over in minutes? Hours? Would help arrive in time? Would loved ones be safe? Questions filled the silence. Few answers emerged. As evening approached, darkness introduced a new layer of difficulty. Visibility decreased. Distances became harder to judge. Shapes became harder to identify. The arrival of night complicated efforts to locate and contain the threat. For law enforcement personnel entering the area, the darkness transformed an already dangerous situation into an even greater challenge. Yet despite the uncertainty, officers continued moving forward. Their responsibility was clear. People inside the community needed protection. Families needed help. Residents needed someone willing to enter the unknown. Among those responding was Sergeant Stuart Guthrie. Like many officers, he entered a situation where information remained incomplete and conditions were constantly changing. The decisions made during those hours required courage measured not in dramatic speeches but in actions. Walking toward danger when every instinct might encourage retreat. Continuing despite uncertainty. Accepting personal risk in order to protect others. Across the settlement, acts of courage emerged in different forms. Neighbors checked on neighbors. Families sheltered together. Individuals shared information whenever possible. Some residents helped others reach safety. Others remained calm for the sake of frightened children. These actions rarely appear in headlines. Yet they become essential during moments of crisis. Communities survive not only because of official responses but because ordinary people refuse to abandon one another. As darkness settled over Aramoana, fear and determination existed side by side. The danger remained unresolved. Authorities continued searching. Residents continued waiting. Nobody knew exactly how the night would end. The uncertainty stretched onward. Each passing hour seemed to generate fresh questions. What was happening elsewhere in the settlement? Who had been affected? How much longer would this continue? For many people, the night felt endless. The normal markers of time disappeared. The future narrowed to immediate concerns. Stay safe. Stay hidden. Stay together. Wait. The events unfolding in Aramoana had already become one of the most serious crises New Zealand had experienced in modern times. Yet those living through it could not see the larger historical significance. They were not thinking about headlines. They were not thinking about history. They were thinking about survival. About family. About making it through the night. As the hours passed, emergency personnel continued working through extraordinary circumstances. Information became clearer. The scale of the tragedy became more apparent. And with every new detail, the weight of the situation grew heavier. What had begun as a peaceful spring afternoon had transformed into a nightmare that seemed impossible to reconcile with the quiet character of the community. The contrast itself felt shocking. How could a place known for calm become the setting of such devastation? How could ordinary lives be disrupted so completely within a matter of hours? Those questions would remain long after the immediate crisis ended. But during the night of November 13th, nobody had the luxury of reflection. The situation remained active. Danger remained present. The story had not yet reached its conclusion. Somewhere in the darkness, the final chapter of the confrontation was still waiting to unfold. And before Aramoana could begin grieving, before investigators could begin searching for answers, before the nation could begin understanding what had happened, there was still one more night to endure. A long night of uncertainty. A long night of fear. A long night that would test the courage of an entire community and leave a permanent mark on New Zealand's history. The first light of morning arrived slowly over Aramoana. A pale grey glow emerged along the horizon where the sea met the sky. Under ordinary circumstances, sunrise in the settlement was something peaceful. The harbour would gradually awaken beneath a blanket of soft light. Seabirds would begin circling above the shoreline. The world would quietly resume its routine. But there was nothing ordinary about the morning of November 14, 1990. The community that greeted the sunrise was not the same community that had watched the sun set the previous evening. Fear lingered in the air. Uncertainty lingered in the air. And for many residents, sleep had never come at all. Throughout the long night, people had remained inside their homes, listening, waiting, hoping for information. Some sat beside telephones. Others stayed close to windows despite knowing there was little they could safely see in the darkness. Families gathered together in living rooms and bedrooms, trying to reassure one another while privately wrestling with fears they could barely express. Outside, police officers continued their painstaking efforts. Every house mattered. Every report mattered. Every movement required caution. As dawn approached, Authorities faced the difficult task of transforming chaos into understanding. The immediate crisis had dominated the previous hours. Now another challenge emerged. What exactly had happened? Who had been affected? How extensive was the tragedy? Those questions could no longer be postponed. Investigators, officers, emergency personnel, and community members all found themselves confronting the same reality. The full picture was still incomplete. The night had concealed many answers. Morning would begin revealing them. Across the settlement, evidence of disruption appeared everywhere. Roads that normally carried only local traffic had become operational zones. Emergency vehicles occupied areas that usually remained quiet. Residents peered cautiously through curtains and windows, searching for signs that the danger had finally passed. Many were afraid to leave their homes. Others desperately wanted information about relatives, friends, and neighbors. In situations like this, uncertainty becomes its own burden. Human beings can endure difficult truths more easily than endless unknowns. The mind instinctively seeks clarity, even painful clarity. The people of Aramoana were no different. As information slowly emerged, that clarity arrived in heartbreaking pieces. Names began circulating. Questions became confirmations. Rumors became facts. And with every confirmed detail, the emotional weight of the tragedy increased. Some residents learned that neighbors they had spoken to only a day earlier would never return home. Others discovered that familiar faces from the community had become part of a national tragedy. The realization spread gradually, yet its impact was immediate. Grief began replacing uncertainty. Shock began replacing confusion. The community started to understand that the consequences of the previous evening would extend far beyond a single night. Meanwhile, investigators entered a landscape unlike anything most of them had previously encountered. The settlement itself had become a vast crime scene. Each location held potential information. Each witness carried a fragment of the story. Each observation might help reconstruct the sequence of events. The challenge facing authorities was enormous. Not because there was a lack of evidence. Rather, because there was so much information to organize. Events had unfolded rapidly. Multiple locations were involved. Witnesses had experienced different parts of the incident from different perspectives. Some had seen only brief moments. Others had heard sounds without seeing their source. Still others had spent hours isolated from reliable information. Piecing together those experiences would require patience and precision. Investigators understood that memory during traumatic events can be complicated. People often remember certain details with extraordinary clarity while struggling to recall others. A specific image may remain vivid for decades. A timeline may become blurred. A voice may be remembered perfectly while an exact sequence of events becomes difficult to reconstruct. This is not dishonesty. It is how the human mind responds to trauma. As officers began conducting interviews, they encountered survivors carrying a mixture of emotions. Relief, fear, exhaustion, grief. Some spoke cautiously. Others spoke rapidly, eager to share everything they could remember. Many were still attempting to process what they had experienced. The interviews became more than investigative tools. They became records of a community struggling to understand its own nightmare. Throughout the day, police worked methodically. They documented locations, collected evidence, verified timelines, compared witness accounts. Every step mattered. Every detail mattered. Because beyond the immediate tragedy lay another responsibility. Understanding. Not speculation. Not assumption. Understanding. Investigators needed an accurate reconstruction of events. Only through that process could they answer the questions already being asked across New Zealand. How had this happened? What sequence of events led to such devastation? Could warning signs have been recognized earlier? Could anything have been done differently? The search for those answers had begun. Yet investigations do not unfold instantly. Popular culture often portrays detectives making dramatic discoveries within hours. Reality is slower, more deliberate, more dependent upon careful analysis. The investigators working in Aramoana understood this. They knew the importance of patience. The truth was not hidden within a single clue waiting to be discovered. It existed within hundreds of observations that needed to be assembled piece by piece. At the same time, another story was unfolding beyond the boundaries of the settlement. News of the tragedy spread throughout New Zealand. Radio broadcasts interrupted normal programming. Television reports reached households across the country. People who had never heard of Aramoana suddenly found themselves learning its name. The nation watched with disbelief. For many New Zealanders, the events seemed almost impossible to comprehend. Mass casualty incidents of this scale felt distant from everyday life. They belonged to foreign news reports. Not local communities. Not familiar landscapes. Not places that looked like home. Yet the reality unfolding in Aramoana challenged those assumptions. The tragedy forced the country to confront uncomfortable questions about violence, isolation, public safety, and community vulnerability. Back inside the settlement, however, those broader discussions remained secondary. Residents were focused on more immediate concerns. Checking on loved ones. Supporting neighbors. Attending gatherings where people sought comfort in one another's presence. The bonds that had defined the community before the tragedy became even more important afterward. People who were grieving rarely wanted to grieve alone. They gathered together. Shared memories. Shared tears. Shared silence. Sometimes silence communicates more than words ever could. There were moments during those days when language felt inadequate. How does someone describe losing a friend? How does someone explain surviving an experience that still feels unreal? How does an entire community begin mourning together? There are no simple answers. Only the slow process of healing. For investigators, however, the work continued. Evidence gradually clarified the timeline. Witness statements filled gaps. The broader sequence of events became increasingly clear. The chaos of the incident slowly transformed into a documented record. That transformation was essential. History depends upon accuracy. Justice depends upon accuracy. The victims deserved accuracy. Their families deserved accuracy. As details accumulated, authorities developed a more comprehensive understanding of what had occurred during those devastating hours. The emerging picture was deeply troubling. Yet it was also necessary. Because communities cannot learn from events they do not fully understand. The investigation therefore served two purposes. One was practical. Determining facts. Establishing timelines. Documenting evidence. The other was historical. Creating a record that would survive long after memories faded. Ensuring that future generations would know what happened and why the event mattered. As the day progressed, the immediate crisis finally gave way to a different phase. The danger had ended. The consequences remained. For survivors, that distinction offered little comfort. Trauma does not disappear when an incident concludes. In many ways, its most difficult effects emerge afterward. When adrenaline fades. When silence returns. When people begin reflecting on what they have experienced. That process was only beginning in Aramoana. The settlement that had once been defined by routine now faced a future marked by remembrance. Every road carried memories. Every familiar landmark carried memories. Every conversation carried memories. The investigation would continue. Questions would continue. National discussions would continue. But beneath all of those developments remained a simple truth. A community had been changed forever. And as investigators carefully assembled the first pieces of the puzzle, another challenge waited just ahead. Understanding the man at the center of the tragedy. Understanding his history. Understanding the path that led to that day. Because while the crime scene could reveal what happened, it could not fully explain why. To answer that question, investigators would soon find themselves looking backward into years of isolation, troubling behavior, missed warning signs, and unanswered questions. The search for those answers would become the next chapter of the story. In the days following the tragedy, Aramoana existed in a strange state between mourning and investigation. The emergency had ended. The immediate danger was gone. Yet the questions remained. For investigators, those questions became the center of everything. Every major criminal investigation begins with uncertainty. Facts exist, but they are scattered. Witnesses remember fragments. Physical evidence tells part of the story. Timelines emerge slowly. Assumptions must be challenged. Conclusions must be earned. In Aramoana, however, investigators faced an unusual situation. They knew who had carried out the attack. They knew where the violence had begun. They knew how the confrontation had ended. What they did not fully understand was why. And sometimes the question of why can be more difficult than every other question combined. The public wanted answers. The media wanted answers. The families wanted answers. New Zealand wanted answers. How had a man living in a small coastal community reached a point where such a tragedy became possible? The investigation therefore expanded beyond the events of November 13th and 14th. Detectives began looking backward. Months backward. Years backward. Even decades backward. The goal was not simply to reconstruct the attack. The goal was to reconstruct the life that preceded it. As investigators interviewed residents, a complicated portrait of David Gray gradually emerged. No single witness possessed the complete picture. Instead, each person contributed a small piece. A memory. An observation. A conversation. An unusual encounter. Individually, many of those details appeared insignificant. Together, they painted the image of a man who had become increasingly disconnected from the world around him. Some residents described him as withdrawn. Others remembered behavior that seemed unpredictable. Several recalled interactions that left them uncomfortable. Yet what struck investigators most was the consistency of a particular theme. Isolation. Again and again, interviews returned to that word. Isolation from neighbors. Isolation from community life. Isolation from meaningful relationships. People often imagine dangerous individuals as obviously threatening. Reality is usually more complicated. Human behavior rarely announces its future consequences. Most individuals who struggle with social isolation never become violent. Most people who display unusual behavior never commit crimes. This reality created one of the central difficulties facing investigators. How could they separate meaningful warning signs from characteristics that, on their own, meant very little? The deeper detectives looked, the more they discovered a life marked by increasing withdrawal. Gray's world appeared to have become smaller over time. His social connections weakened. His participation in community life diminished. The distance between himself and those around him continued growing. Yet isolation alone was not enough to explain the tragedy. Investigators needed something more. A trigger. A pattern. A progression. Some clue that could help explain how frustration evolved into catastrophe. As evidence accumulated, detectives began examining Gray's personal history in greater detail. Employment difficulties. Financial pressures. Social struggles. Reports of unusual conduct. Past conflicts. Each element was analyzed carefully. The investigation became an effort to understand not only actions but mindset. Not only behavior but perception. Because crimes of this scale often involve a profound disconnect between how an offender sees the world and how the world actually exists. The challenge was that David Gray was no longer alive to answer questions. There would be no formal interrogation. No courtroom testimony. No opportunity to directly explain his actions. Everything investigators learned would have to come indirectly. Through documents. Through witnesses. Through observations made by others. This limitation created unavoidable uncertainty. Even after months of investigation, Some questions would remain unanswered. That reality frustrates both investigators and the public. People naturally seek complete explanations. They want causes that fit neatly into conclusions. But human behavior rarely works that way. Lives are messy. Motives are messy. Psychology is messy. Sometimes investigators uncover a clear reason. Other times they uncover only layers of contributing factors. The investigation into Aramoana increasingly suggested the second possibility. There was no single discovery capable of explaining everything. No hidden document. No dramatic confession. No secret conspiracy. Instead, investigators encountered a series of factors that appeared to intersect over time. Personal grievances. Social withdrawal. Emotional instability. Accumulated frustrations. Together they created a picture, though not a complete one. Meanwhile, outside official investigative circles, speculation spread rapidly. Whenever a major crime occurs, theories emerge. Some are plausible. Others are not. People search for explanations because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. In the absence of information, imagination fills the gaps. Rumors circulated. Stories expanded. Certain details became exaggerated as they passed from person to person. Investigators therefore faced another responsibility: separating fact from speculation, establishing what could be verified, rejecting what could not. This process required patience. Patience that sometimes conflicted with public demand for immediate answers. Reporters sought updates. Citizens sought reassurance. Families sought understanding. Yet investigators knew that premature conclusions could create lasting problems. Accuracy mattered more than speed. Every statement required evidence. Every conclusion required support. As the weeks progressed, authorities continued reviewing witness accounts from throughout the community. Many interviews revealed subtle details about Gray's relationship with those around him. Residents remembered moments that seemed unusual in retrospect. Conversations that now carried different meaning. Incidents that appeared minor at the time but felt significant afterward. This phenomenon is common following major tragedies. People naturally revisit the past searching for clues. They ask themselves whether something could have been recognized earlier. Whether intervention might have changed the outcome. Whether warning signs existed. The answers are rarely simple. Hindsight creates clarity that did not exist beforehand. Events that appear obvious after a tragedy often appeared ambiguous before it. One of the most difficult conclusions investigators confronted involved this very issue. Many warning signs are only recognizable when viewed collectively. No single event predicts catastrophe. No single behavior predicts catastrophe. The danger emerges when multiple concerns converge over time. Yet recognizing that convergence in real time remains extraordinarily difficult. This realization shaped much of the broader discussion surrounding the case. Could systems have responded differently? Could support have been offered earlier? Could risks have been identified sooner? These questions extended beyond criminal investigation into social policy, mental health, and community responsibility. The search for answers became larger than Aramoana itself. It became a national conversation. Within police circles, investigators also conducted extensive reviews of the response to the crisis. Such reviews are standard following major incidents. Not because mistakes are assumed. Because lessons matter. Every emergency response contains opportunities for learning. Officers examined timelines, communication systems, decision-making processes, operational challenges. The goal was improvement. Future incidents, however unlikely, would demand the benefit of every lesson available. One figure appeared repeatedly throughout these discussions: Sergeant Stuart Guthrie. His actions during the crisis became the subject of both investigation and admiration. Colleagues reviewed his decisions. Witnesses described his conduct. The picture that emerged was one of commitment under extraordinarily dangerous circumstances. While investigators analyzed countless details surrounding the tragedy, Guthrie's actions served as a reminder that even during humanity's darkest moments, courage remains possible. As months passed, the investigative picture gradually solidified. The uncertainty that had dominated the early days began giving way to understanding. Not perfect understanding. Not complete understanding. But enough to establish a coherent account. Authorities could explain the sequence of events. They could explain the response. They could explain many of the contributing factors that appeared relevant. What remained elusive was the final question that haunts nearly every major criminal case. Why did one individual cross a line that millions of others never cross? Investigators had examined history, psychology, behavior, relationships, circumstances. Yet no answer felt entirely sufficient. Perhaps because some acts resist complete explanation. Perhaps because human behavior can never be reduced to a single cause. Perhaps because tragedy often leaves behind questions that survive long after investigations end. Still, despite those uncertainties, the investigation achieved something important. It transformed chaos into record, rumor into fact, confusion into understanding. The people of Aramoana deserved that effort. The victims deserved that effort. And New Zealand deserved that effort. Yet even as investigators completed their work, another stage remained ahead. A stage not focused on gathering facts but on examining consequences. A stage where the nation would confront difficult questions about responsibility, public safety, and the legacy of what had happened. The investigation had revealed the past. The next chapter would determine how that past would shape the future. In many criminal investigations, there is a moment investigators later describe as the breakthrough. A discovery. A confession. A forgotten piece of evidence. A single detail that suddenly brings everything into focus. The story of Aramoana was different. There was no dramatic revelation hidden in a dusty file. No unexpected witness stepping forward years later. No secret that changed everything. Instead, the breakthrough came slowly. Painfully. Through the accumulation of hundreds of facts. Hundreds of interviews. Hundreds of observations. Like a photograph developing inside a darkroom, the picture became clearer one detail at a time. By the time investigators reached this stage, they already understood the broad outline of the tragedy. They understood where it had happened. They understood who had been responsible. They understood how the crisis had unfolded. What remained was the deeper challenge. Understanding the chain of circumstances that allowed such devastation to occur. 4 weeks, detectives, analysts, and officials had sifted through witness statements, community histories, police records, personal accounts, operational reports. Each document represented another piece of a puzzle nobody wished existed. The more information they gathered, the more apparent a difficult truth became. There was no single cause. No single failure. No single moment where history could easily have been redirected. The tragedy emerged from a convergence of factors. That realization became the investigation's most important breakthrough. People often prefer simple explanations because simple explanations create emotional comfort. If one specific cause can be identified, then one specific solution can be proposed. But reality is rarely so cooperative. The investigation revealed a far more complicated picture. The portrait of David Gray that emerged was not the portrait of a man who transformed overnight. Nor was it the portrait of a man whose intentions had been obvious to everyone around him. Instead, investigators found evidence of a long and gradual deterioration. A life increasingly defined by withdrawal, frustration, isolation, and disconnection. The breakthrough was not discovering something nobody knew. The breakthrough was understanding how many small observations fit together. One resident remembered unusual interactions. Another recalled growing concerns over behavior. Someone else remembered avoiding contact whenever possible. Individually, none of these memories appeared extraordinary. Together, They revealed patterns. Patterns that became visible only after investigators assembled them side by side. This realization carried profound implications, because it suggested that understanding dangerous behavior required looking beyond isolated incidents. It required examining accumulation, trajectory, progression. The story was not about a single day. It was about years. Years during which warning signs existed in fragmented form. Years during which personal difficulties appeared to deepen. Years during which connections to the wider community weakened. For investigators, this represented a crucial shift. The focus moved away from searching for one decisive answer. Instead, attention turned toward understanding interconnected factors. Social isolation, personal grievances, behavioral instability, community dynamics, access to firearms, psychological deterioration. None alone explained the tragedy. Together, they formed a framework that helped explain how the unimaginable became possible. As these conclusions emerged, government officials and policy experts began paying close attention. The investigation was no longer solely about documenting a historical event. It was becoming a lesson, a warning, a case study with implications extending far beyond Aramoana. Questions previously confined to investigative circles entered national discussions. How should warning signs be evaluated? How should communities respond when concerns arise about someone's behavior? What responsibilities belong to institutions? What responsibilities belong to society itself? The breakthrough therefore expanded beyond criminal investigation. It became societal. The country was no longer asking only what happened. The country was asking what could be learned. Meanwhile, families affected by the tragedy continued navigating a different reality. For them, breakthroughs did not erase grief. Answers did not reverse loss. No investigative finding could restore a loved one. No report could return life to what it had been before November 1990. Yet many families expressed a need for understanding. Not because understanding removes pain. Because uncertainty often deepens it. People naturally search for meaning after tragedy. When meaning cannot be found, confusion sometimes becomes its own burden. The investigation's conclusions offered at least a partial framework. Not complete closure. Closure is a word often used too casually. Some losses never fully close. Some questions never fully disappear. But understanding can provide structure. It can help transform chaos into something that can be examined rather than merely feared. Within police circles, another breakthrough emerged through the review process. Officers studying the response recognized important lessons regarding communication, coordination, and crisis management. The events at Aramoana became a reference point for future planning. Not because authorities expected identical incidents to occur again, but because every major emergency teaches lessons that may one day save lives elsewhere. These lessons extended into training programs, operational reviews, strategic planning. The tragedy therefore influenced not only those directly involved but also future generations of emergency responders. In this sense, knowledge itself became a form of legacy. A painful legacy, yet an important one. The same applied to national conversations surrounding firearm regulations. As policymakers reviewed investigative findings, they began examining broader questions about access, oversight, and public safety. The tragedy had exposed vulnerabilities. Those vulnerabilities demanded attention. Public debate intensified. Experts contributed research. Officials considered reforms. Citizens voiced concerns. The breakthrough had moved beyond understanding the past. It was beginning to shape the future. For residents of Aramoana, however, these larger discussions often felt distant compared to the reality of everyday recovery. Healing did not occur inside government buildings. Healing occurred around kitchen tables, at community gatherings, during quiet conversations between neighbors, inside homes where photographs suddenly carried greater significance. Recovery unfolded through countless small moments. A shared meal. A supportive conversation. A memorial service. A familiar face checking in on another familiar face. The investigation revealed facts. The community carried consequences. And yet, despite the immense suffering, another truth became increasingly visible. Aramoana had not been defined solely by tragedy. Throughout the crisis, people had displayed remarkable courage. Neighbors had helped neighbors. Families had protected one another. Emergency responders had entered uncertainty to assist strangers. Acts of compassion appeared repeatedly within witness statements. Again and again, investigators encountered examples of ordinary people choosing courage over fear. Those stories mattered. They remain important today. Because if history remembers only violence, then it misses part of the truth. The full story includes resilience. The full story includes sacrifice. The full story includes humanity. As investigative reports neared completion, officials possessed a far clearer understanding of the tragedy than they had in the chaotic hours immediately following the attack. The facts had been established. The timeline reconstructed. The contributing factors examined. The lessons identified. The breakthrough was complete. Not a single revelation. Not a dramatic twist. But a comprehensive understanding earned through patience, discipline, and careful analysis. The country now knew far more about what had happened. Yet knowledge brought another responsibility. What should be done with that knowledge? How should a nation respond? How should institutions change? How should victims be remembered? These questions would shape the next phase of the story. Because every major tragedy eventually reaches a point where investigation gives way to accountability. Where analysis gives way to judgment. Where facts enter the public record and society decides what they mean. For Aramoana, that moment was approaching. The search for answers had illuminated the past. Now New Zealand would confront the challenge of deciding what kind of future should emerge from it. And in that future, the memory of those who were lost would remain at the center of everything. In most true crime stories, the pursuit of justice follows a familiar path. The investigation identifies a suspect. The suspect is arrested. Evidence is presented in court. Witnesses testify. Lawyers argue. A verdict is delivered. The legal system, imperfect as it may be, provides a structure through which society seeks accountability. Aramoana was different. By the time investigators completed their work, there would be no courtroom battle waiting at the end of the story. No defendant sitting before a judge. No jury listening to weeks of testimony. No dramatic verdict announced beneath the gaze of television cameras. The man responsible for the tragedy was already dead. For many people, that reality created a difficult and uncomfortable question. What does justice look like when there is no trial? How does a community find accountability when the person responsible will never stand before a court? The answer would prove far more complicated than anyone wished. In the weeks and months following the massacre, New Zealand entered a period of collective reflection. The immediate shock began giving way to deeper examination. Investigators continued compiling reports. Officials reviewed evidence. Families mourned. Communities searched for ways to move forward. Yet beneath all of those efforts remained a lingering sense of incompleteness. A criminal trial serves many purposes. It establishes facts. It creates a public record. It allows victims and survivors to hear evidence presented openly. It provides society with a visible process through which responsibility is assigned. Without that process, many people felt as though an important chapter had been removed from the story. There would be no opportunity to question the offender. No opportunity to challenge him. No opportunity to hear an explanation from the person who caused so much suffering. The questions that haunted Aramoana would remain largely unanswered. Why had he done it? What had he been thinking? Could the tragedy have been prevented? Those questions echoed through newspaper articles, public discussions, and private conversations across the country. Yet no definitive answer ever emerged. Instead, justice in the Aramoana case took a different form. Rather than focusing solely on punishment, attention shifted toward truth, toward understanding, toward accountability within institutions and systems, toward ensuring that the victims would not be forgotten. Official inquiries became an essential part of that process. Authorities examined every aspect of the tragedy, the actions leading up to it, the emergency response, the broader circumstances surrounding the offender's life. The purpose was not to assign criminal guilt. That question had already been resolved. The purpose was to determine what lessons could be learned. These reviews demanded honesty. Difficult honesty. The kind of honesty that requires institutions to examine themselves critically. Police procedures were reviewed. Communication systems were reviewed. Operational decisions were reviewed. The goal was not blame. The goal was improvement. Every major tragedy forces societies to ask difficult questions about preparedness. Aramoana was no exception. Experts analyzed what had worked. They analyzed what had not. They examined how emergency responses might evolve in the future. How information could be shared more effectively. How officers could be better equipped for extraordinary situations. These discussions sometimes unfolded behind closed doors. Others occurred publicly. Together, they formed an important component of justice. Not justice as revenge. Justice as responsibility. Justice as learning. Justice as prevention. For the families affected by the massacre, however, such distinctions were often difficult. Reports could not replace loved ones. Recommendations could not erase grief. Policy changes could not restore what had been taken. Many families carried losses that would remain with them for the rest of their lives. Birthdays arrived without familiar voices. Holidays arrived with empty chairs. Family photographs acquired new meanings. Time moved forward. Grief moved with it. Some people imagine that justice brings closure. Reality is more complicated. Justice may answer questions. It may establish accountability. It may provide a sense of resolution. But it rarely removes pain. The families of Aramoana did not need a report to tell them their lives had changed. They lived that reality every day. Yet many still believed in the importance of understanding what had happened. Not because understanding would eliminate suffering. Because understanding offered a foundation upon which future prevention could be built. One figure became particularly significant in the public conversation surrounding courage and sacrifice. Sergeant Stuart Guthrie. Throughout New Zealand, his actions during the crisis drew widespread respect. Colleagues remembered his professionalism. Residents remembered his willingness to confront danger. Officials recognized the role he played during one of the most difficult nights in modern New Zealand policing. His death resonated deeply throughout the country. Not only because he was a police officer, because he represented something larger. The willingness to place oneself at risk for the safety of others. That willingness became part of the broader story of Aramoana. A reminder that even amid devastation, examples of courage remained. Recognition of such courage became another form of justice. Not legal justice. Moral justice. The acknowledgement that sacrifice matters. That service matters. That bravery deserves remembrance. As investigations concluded and official findings entered the public record, another debate began gathering momentum. The debate surrounding firearms. For many New Zealanders, Aramoana fundamentally altered how they viewed gun regulation. The tragedy forced difficult conversations into the national spotlight. Questions that once seemed theoretical suddenly felt urgent. How should firearms be regulated? What safeguards should exist? What responsibilities accompany ownership? Public discussion became increasingly intense. Supporters of reform argued that the tragedy exposed weaknesses requiring attention. Others emphasized different perspectives. The debates were sometimes emotional, sometimes contentious. But they reflected a society attempting to learn from tragedy rather than simply endure it. Eventually, significant legislative changes emerged. New restrictions and regulatory measures reflected lessons drawn from the events at Aramoana. These changes represented one of the most visible long-term outcomes of the massacre. For some observers, this became a powerful example of justice taking a preventive form. The victims could not be brought back. But perhaps future lives could be protected. Perhaps future tragedies could become less likely. Whether such measures can eliminate violence entirely remains a matter of debate. No law can guarantee perfect safety. No policy can eliminate human suffering. Yet societies continue striving toward improvement because the alternative is resignation. And resignation is rarely acceptable after tragedy. Meanwhile, the media continued documenting the impact of Aramoana for years afterward. Journalists returned to the story repeatedly. Documentaries explored its significance. Researchers examined its lessons. Historians placed it within the broader narrative of New Zealand history. The event became more than a crime. It became a national reference point. A moment people remembered when discussing public safety, community resilience, and collective trauma. This visibility carried both benefits and burdens. Public attention ensured that the victims were not forgotten. Yet it also meant that survivors periodically found themselves revisiting painful memories. Every anniversary brought renewed coverage. Every retrospective revived difficult emotions. Memory became both a tribute and a challenge. The search for justice therefore extended far beyond official proceedings. It became intertwined with remembrance itself. Remembering accurately. Remembering respectfully. Remembering the people rather than only the violence. That distinction mattered. Because justice is not solely about offenders. It is also about victims. About preserving their humanity. About ensuring that their stories are not overshadowed by the actions that ended them. As years passed, Aramoana slowly rebuilt aspects of everyday life. The roads remained. The shoreline remained. The ocean continued rising and falling against the coast. Children eventually played where previous generations had played. New memories emerged. Yet the past never disappeared completely. It remained woven into the identity of the place. A permanent chapter in its history. By the end of the official process, there was no dramatic courtroom verdict to close the case. No final declaration capable of satisfying every question. Instead, there existed something more complex. A record. A reckoning. A collective effort to understand what had happened and what it meant. Justice in Aramoana was not delivered in a single day. It unfolded through investigations, inquiries, reforms, memorials, and remembrance. It emerged through the determination to learn from tragedy rather than look away from it. And although that form of justice lacked the dramatic finality often portrayed in crime stories, it carried a significance of its own. Because sometimes accountability is measured not by punishment imposed upon the guilty, but by the responsibility embraced by everyone who remains. The legal chapters of the story were drawing to a close. The historical chapters were only beginning. And as New Zealand moved forward, the legacy of Aramoana would continue shaping conversations for decades to come. The final chapter of this story would not focus on crime. It would focus on memory, on loss, on resilience, and on what remains after the headlines fade and history settles into silence. Today, if you travel to Aramoana, you might struggle to imagine the events that unfolded there in November of 1990. The ocean still rolls toward the shore. The wind still moves across the dunes. The sky still stretches endlessly above the harbor. Nature, indifferent to human tragedy, continues its ancient routines. At first glance, the landscape appears peaceful. Almost timeless. The same coastline that existed before the tragedy remains there now. The same horizon. The same sea. The same quiet roads. Yet anyone familiar with the history of the settlement understands that the landscape carries more than scenery. It carries memory. Invisible but permanent. Memory exists in places just as it exists in people. Certain locations become attached to moments that cannot be forgotten. A street corner. A house. A shoreline. A community. Years pass. Generations change. Buildings age. But memory remains. For Aramoana, memory became part of its identity. Not the entirety of its identity, but an inseparable part of it. That reality presents a difficult challenge for communities affected by tragedy. How do you remember without becoming trapped by remembrance? How do you honor loss while continuing to live? How do you preserve history without allowing history to consume the future? These are questions with no universal answers. Every survivor discovers their own path. Every family discovers their own path. Every community discovers its own path. The years following the massacre were marked by exactly that process. The slow and often uneven process of healing. Healing is one of the most misunderstood words in the aftermath of tragedy. People often imagine healing as a destination. A point where pain disappears. A moment when grief finally ends. Reality is rarely so simple. For many survivors, healing does not mean forgetting. It does not mean moving on. It means learning how to carry memory without being crushed by it. It means learning how to build a future while acknowledging the past. The residents of Aramoana faced that challenge together. Some remained in the community. Others eventually left. Some found comfort in conversation. Others preferred silence. Some participated in memorial events. Others grieved privately. There was no correct way to mourn. Only different ways. And all of them reflected the same truth. The losses were real. The losses mattered. The losses would always matter. For the families of those who died, time created a unique kind of sorrow. The initial shock faded. The media attention faded. National conversations shifted toward other events. But grief remained. The calendar continued moving forward. Birthdays arrived. Anniversaries arrived. Holidays arrived. And each occasion carried reminders of who was missing. The world often expects grief to become smaller over time. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it simply changes shape. A parent continues wondering who their child might have become. A sibling continues imagining conversations that never happened. A friend continues noticing moments they wish they could share. Loss becomes woven into ordinary life. Not constantly visible. Yet always present. Like a scar beneath clothing. Invisible to most people. Impossible for the person carrying it to forget. The story of Aramoana also became a story about resilience. That word is frequently used after tragedy, sometimes so often that it risks losing meaning. Yet resilience is not optimism. It is not pretending everything is fine. Resilience is waking up the morning after devastation and continuing anyway. It is attending funerals and still finding the strength to support others. It is carrying sorrow while refusing to surrender entirely to despair. The residents of Aramoana demonstrated that kind of resilience. Not dramatically. Not perfectly. Simply humanly. One day at a time. One conversation at a time. 1 year at a time. As New Zealand reflected upon the tragedy, broader lessons continued emerging. The massacre became a reference point in discussions about public safety, mental health, community awareness, firearm regulation, emergency response. The event forced the nation to confront realities many people would have preferred not to consider. The uncomfortable truth that severe violence can emerge even in places that appear peaceful. The uncomfortable truth that isolation sometimes hides suffering that remains unseen. The uncomfortable truth that communities are not immune to tragedy simply because they are small. These lessons did not arrive easily. They were paid for at an enormous cost. That cost must never be forgotten. Yet history becomes meaningful only when societies are willing to learn from it. Aramoana became one of those moments. A painful lesson. A lasting lesson. A lesson future generations continue studying decades later. The tragedy also changed how many New Zealanders thought about courage. Because amid the fear and devastation, there were countless examples of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Neighbors helping neighbors. Families protecting one another. Emergency responders entering dangerous situations to assist strangers. Acts of bravery rarely erase tragedy. But they remind us that human beings are capable of remarkable compassion even during their darkest hours. Among those remembered for such courage was Sergeant Stuart Guthrie. His actions became part of the enduring legacy of the event. Not because he sought recognition. Because he fulfilled a responsibility despite extraordinary danger. His story remains a reminder that heroism is often defined by action rather than intention. By what people choose to do when circumstances demand difficult choices. Years later, memorials and commemorations ensured that those who died would not become forgotten names in historical records. Remembrance serves an important purpose. Not simply preserving facts. Preserving humanity. The victims were more than participants in a tragedy. They were people with lives, relationships, ambitions, and dreams. Remembering them means remembering those things as well. It means refusing to reduce human beings to statistics. Because numbers can never tell the whole story. A number cannot describe a laugh. A favorite hobby. A friendship. A future that never arrived. Only memory can do that. And memory remains one of the most powerful forms of tribute. As decades passed, new generations encountered the story of Aramoana through books, documentaries, newspaper archives, and conversations with those who remembered. For younger New Zealanders, the event belonged to history. For survivors and families, it remained something more personal. History and memory often coexist that way. One speaks through records. The other speaks through emotion. Together they preserve the truth. The truth of what happened. The truth of who was lost. The truth of how a nation responded. There is a temptation in true crime storytelling to search for neat conclusions. A final lesson. A final answer. A final explanation that somehow resolves everything. Aramoana resists that temptation. Some questions remain unanswered. Some mysteries remain within the mind of a man who never faced trial. Some wounds remain impossible to fully heal. Perhaps the most honest conclusion is also the simplest. Terrible things can happen in ordinary places. Communities are stronger than they realize. Memory matters. Compassion matters. And the lives lost deserve to be remembered for far more than the way they died. When people hear the name Aramoana today, many immediately think of tragedy. That reaction is understandable. History has attached the community's name to one of the darkest events in modern New Zealand. Yet there is another way to remember it. As a place where ordinary people lived ordinary lives. As a community that endured unimaginable hardship. As a reminder of both human vulnerability and human resilience. The sea continues to move against the shore. The seasons continue changing. The years continue passing. Children who were not yet born in 1990 now walk through a world shaped in part by the lessons learned from that tragedy. Time moves forward. It always does. But some stories remain. Aramoana remains. Not because of the man who brought violence there. History contains countless names like his. Most eventually fade. Aramoana remains because of the people. The families. The survivors. The neighbors. The responders. The community. And because the true legacy of any tragedy is not found in the actions of the person who caused it. It is found in the lives of those who endured it. In the courage they displayed. In the memories they preserved. And in the determination to ensure that even after the headlines disappeared, the people who were lost would never be forgotten. The waves continue arriving. The wind continues crossing the dunes. The horizon remains unchanged. But for those who remember, Aramoana will always be more than a place on a map. It will always be a reminder of how fragile ordinary life can be. Of how precious ordinary life can be. and of why every story, no matter how dark, must ultimately return to the people whose lives mattered most.